Have you ever noticed how the happiest people often seem kind of oblivious? That kid giggling on the playground doesn't know anything about death. That couple holding hands at the cafe. They aren't thinking about how their relationship might end someday. And that cheerful old man feeding the birds? He's probably never read a single line of Nietzsche or Camus telling him that life has no inherent meaning. It makes you wonder, could it be that wisdom, the very thing we're taught to chase, is actually what robs us of happiness? Arthur Schopenhauer, that famously gloomy 19th century German philosopher, certainly thought so. He made a claim that challenges pretty much everything we value today: our education system, our obsession with awareness, and the idea that intelligence is some kind of superpower. What if, the more you know, the more miserable you become? Think about it. Knowledge and intelligence are supposed to be our way out of suffering, out of ignorance, out of the dark. We've built entire systems around this belief. Universities, libraries, TED Talks, even that smartphone you carry around with the sum of human knowledge in your pocket. But here's the catch. Suicide rates are often highest in the most educated populations. Depression disproportionately affects academics more than people in manual labor jobs. And countries with the highest average IQs? They're not topping the charts in happiness. Now ask yourself this. Have you ever learned something you wish you hadn't? Maybe you found out an uncomfortable truth about someone you admired. Maybe you read about some looming environmental disaster that you, personally, can do nothing about. What did that knowledge do to you? Did it make your day better? Or did it plant a weight in your chest that wasn't there before? Psychologists even have a name for this. It's called depressive realism, and it's kind of terrifying. Studies show that people with mild depression often have a more accurate perception of reality than those who are clinically happy. Turns out, the happiest among us might just be living under a bit of self-deception, thinking they're more in control than they really are, that things are better than they actually are. So, what is it that wisdom reveals that makes us so miserable? Let's take a closer look. Last summer, I watched my 5-year-old niece at the beach. For hours, she built sandcastles, completely absorbed in her little world. I pointed out to her, "You know the tide's going to wash those away, right?" She shrugged, smiled, and said, "That's okay. I'll just build more tomorrow." No existential crisis, no meditative reflection on the impermanence of all things, just pure, in-the-moment joy. And that's the difference. Animals don't know about death. A dog doesn't sit there contemplating its own mortality. But humans? We do know. We're cursed with that knowledge. From the time we're children, we start to learn. Everyone dies. Everything ends. Every friendship, every vacation, every joy unfolds under the shadow of that truth. Schopenhauer believed that our awareness of death colors everything. "The fear of death," he wrote, "is the beginning of philosophy." And so we build systems, religions, ideologies, legacies, anything to help us cope with the reality that this all ends. But those who don't fully grasp death, the young, the cognitively insulated, the blissfully unaware, they're not burdened in the same way. They live in the moment, not next to it, analyzing its fleeting nature. You ever had that moment? Maybe you're watching a sunset or laughing with someone you love, and suddenly the thought hits you, this is going to end someday. That haunting, bittersweet realization? That's the curse of mortality awareness. But it's not the only curse that comes with wisdom. Let's talk about free will, or rather, the illusion of it. Imagine believing, deep down, that you are the master of your destiny, that every choice you've made came from your true, authentic self, that your success is yours alone, that your path is yours to forge. Feels empowering, right? Now, what if I told you that none of that is actually true? Schopenhauer was one of the first Western philosophers to say, straight up, that free will is a myth. He argued, a man can do what he wants, but he cannot will what he wants. In other words, your desires, your preferences, even your thoughts, They're not really yours. They're the result of genetics, upbringing, and countless random factors outside your control. And modern neuroscience, it's backing him up. Brain scans show that your brain makes decisions before you become consciously aware of them. You think you're choosing, but really, your unconscious mind already did, and you're just tagging along for the ride. So what does this mean? It means the average person, unaware of all this, feels like they're in control. Their choices feel real. Their achievements feel earned. But the wise person, the one who sees the causal chain stretching back before they were born, realizes they're more like a character in a movie than the director. They're living out a script they didn't write, running on biological hardware they didn't design. And if that wasn't enough to make you question everything, let's talk about progress. That beautiful, shiny word we all grew up believing in. As a kid, you probably thought adults had the world figured out, that science was fixing things, that good always beats evil, that the future would be better. But when did that illusion start to crack for you? Education trains us to celebrate progress, medical breakthroughs, tech innovation, civil rights victories. And yes, those things matter. But wisdom shows us something more complicated. Schopenhauer rejected the Enlightenment dream of inevitable progress. Why? Because human nature doesn't change. For every invention that saves lives, we invent another that destroys them. For every reform, a new corruption. We wage war. We exploit the weak. We pollute our own home. And if you really pay attention, if you're wise enough to connect the dots, you see that every convenience, every comfort, often comes at someone else's expense. That phone in your hand? Built with materials mined by underpaid workers. That miracle drug? Maybe it exists thanks to a shady deal with a pharma giant. That social network you love? It's probably rewiring your brain, feeding you dopamine hits while mining your data. Have you ever wanted to unlearn something, just so you could enjoy your life again? Yeah, welcome to the downside of wisdom. Beyond these specific burdens, mortality, free will, and progress, there's a deeper, more universal truth that wisdom uncovers. One that Schopenhauer believed was his most important insight. Let's talk about suffering. I was on a silent meditation retreat not long ago. One of the attendees, a successful executive, the kind of guy you'd assume had life completely figured out, broke down during one of our group sessions. Through tears, he said, "I never realized how much suffering there is in every moment. How do people live with this awareness?" And that's the thing. Most people don't live with that awareness, or if they do, they bury it under distractions, routines, entertainment. But once you see it, once you really start noticing the suffering, it's everywhere. Schopenhauer believed pain is the default state of life, not just some occasional bump in the road, but the foundation of our existence. He called pleasure negative, just a brief relief from desire. You're hungry, you eat. You're cold, you get warm. But that moment of pleasure, it's only meaningful because it's a break from suffering. Life, he wrote, is a business that does not cover the costs. And when you really sit with that idea, tally up all the moments of boredom, frustration, longing, grief, anxiety, and weigh them against the fleeting moments of joy, well, the math doesn't exactly come out in our favor. The more you observe, the more you realize how much suffering underpins everything. Think about how many living beings have to suffer and die for others to survive, not just in nature, but in our systems of food, labor, commerce. How many dreams get crushed so one can come true? How many hours of meaningless labor, numbing routines, social comparison, and inner turmoil fill the average life, all for a few moments of "this is nice"? The simple person? They don't think about all this. They just enjoy their cheeseburger. The wise person? They're seeing the invisible costs. The factory worker's exhaustion, the cow's fear, the ecological damage, the dopamine loop they're caught in. Even pleasure becomes complicated under the lens of wisdom. But we're not done yet. Wisdom doesn't just turn the lens inward, it also casts a harsh light on our relationships. And this one might be the most painful of all. You ever have that moment at a party or dinner table where you suddenly zoom out and see everything differently? You start noticing the subtle status games, the one-upmanship, the fake laughter, the way people change how they act depending on who's watching, the little power moves, the insecurity hidden behind someone's bragging. It's like that moment in The Matrix when Neo sees the code behind reality. You're no longer in the social game, you're analyzing it from the outside. Schopenhauer had a lot to say about human relationships, and none of it was warm and fuzzy. He believed that most of our sorrows come directly from our interactions with others. Why? Because we build relationships on illusions, on performance, on politeness that hides indifference, on love that depends on conditions, on social contracts that serve personal interests more than shared values. And yet, the socially naive person, the one who believes in unconditional love, in genuine compliments, in lifelong loyalty, they're often happier. Because they're not second-guessing every motive. They're not trying to decode every interaction. They take people at face value. They believe what they're told. The wise person? They know better. They understand evolutionary psychology. They see the unconscious mating strategies, the status climbing, the reciprocal altruism that often masquerades as generosity. They know that under the surface, humans are still just clever primates trying to get ahead. But that understanding makes it harder to fully feel connected, harder to trust, harder to let go and just be with people. And so the wise person can become a kind of outsider, always seeing the puppet strings, never able to enjoy the show. Now, after everything we've explored, death, free will, suffering, and the painful clarity about relationships, we face the million-dollar question. Is there actually a connection between knowledge and unhappiness? Or is this all just philosophical doom-posting? Let me tell you about two friends of mine. Maria has 3 graduate degrees, speaks 5 languages, and reads philosophy for fun. Her apartment is full of dense books, climate reports, and notes for her upcoming ethics seminar. Alex dropped out of college, works at a local shop, and spends his weekends fishing, watching football, and grilling with his neighbors. Guess which one takes antidepressants, and which one seems to glow with effortless contentment? It's not just anecdotal. Happiness research consistently shows a strange pattern. Beyond a certain point, more education, more information, and more awareness correlate with less happiness. The happiest communities in the world? Often the ones with simpler beliefs, stronger religious faith, tighter cultural norms, less exposure to the chaos of infinite worldviews. And on an individual level, the happiest people often score lower on self-awareness and higher on something called flow, the ability to get lost in an activity without constant self-monitoring. It's like the mind needs to be tricked a little to be happy. Schopenhauer recognized this way before the science did. His advice? Lose yourself in art, in beauty, in compassion. These, he believed, were the only real ways to escape the trap of overthinking, even if just temporarily. And modern psychology agrees. Practices like mindfulness, where you quiet the analyzing mind, are now proven to reduce suffering and boost well-being. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Sometimes, to be happy, we have to turn off the very part of ourselves that makes us wise. So what happens when we can't turn it off? When the knowledge is already in us, and we can't unlearn it? That's where we head next, into the responses. How philosophers, past and present, have tried to deal with this paradox. Throughout history, some of the greatest minds have grappled with the very paradox we've been exploring. The idea that wisdom, the ability to see clearly, to understand deeply, may also be what strips life of its joy. Take Socrates, for example. He's famously known for saying, "The unexamined life is not worth living." He believed that wisdom, through constant questioning and reflection, leads to a deeper understanding of oneself and the world. In his view, knowledge was the path to a meaningful life. Then there's the Buddha, who also saw wisdom as a key to liberation, but with a twist. He taught that suffering comes from desire, and that through wisdom one can detach from craving and achieve peace. But even that awareness, that all things are impermanent, that nothing lasts, can itself lead to a kind of existential dissatisfaction. It's like unlocking the door to freedom and realizing it opens onto a windy cliff. Fast forward to the modern era, and you meet the existentialists, thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Albert Camus. These philosophers didn't try to sugarcoat the burden of wisdom. Nietzsche believed that truly deep understanding isolates you, that once you see behind the social norms, behind the cultural illusions, behind the facades people live by, you find yourself alone. He talked about the abyss, that haunting void of meaninglessness that opens up when all the old certainties collapse. Camus took it a step further. In the myth of Sisyphus, he describes the absurd man, the one who understands that life has no inherent meaning, yet still must find a way to go on. He used the image of Sisyphus, eternally rolling a boulder up a hill only to watch it roll back down, as a metaphor for human existence. The twist? Camus says we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because acknowledging the absurd and still choosing to live is its own kind of triumph. But this all brings us back to a deeply uncomfortable question. Does happiness come from ignorance? Is it better to live in blissful simplicity, to trust, to hope, to feel without dissecting, even if that means living under illusions? Or is it better to see the truth, to understand the full picture, even if it costs you your joy? He believed that life was suffering, plain and simple. And once you realize that, the only sane response is asceticism, denying the will to life itself. He wasn't advocating for suicide. In fact, he believed suicide still affirms the will. Instead, he thought the wise person should practice a kind of living death, a detachment from desires, pleasures, and worldly goals. A man can do what he wants, but he cannot want what he wants, he wrote. So the wise course, in his view, was to stop wanting entirely. But let's not stay in the darkness too long. Because, while these philosophical perspectives may seem grim, they also invite us to ask, what can we do with our wisdom? Maybe the problem isn't wisdom itself, maybe it's how we relate to it. To bring this idea into sharper focus, let me introduce you to two fictional characters. First, there's Professor James Morrison, brilliant neuroscientist, Ivy League degrees, published expert in consciousness and human behavior. In a recent university lecture, a student asked him, "Has all your knowledge made you happier?" He laughed bitterly. "I know too much to be happy," he said. He explained, "I understand that my love for my wife is just oxytocin and evolved pair bonding, that my sense of pride is a neurochemical illusion, that my morals are arbitrary constructs shaped by culture and genes." James has been married and divorced 3 times. Each relationship collapsed under the weight of his endless analysis. His achievements bring no joy because he knows exactly how his brain manipulates him with dopamine. He can't even watch a movie without breaking down the plot devices and emotional tricks. Then there's Joe Simmons. Joe graduated high school, works at a warehouse, and spends most of his free time barbecuing, fishing, and going to church. He doesn't question much. He trusts his community. He accepts his faith. He's been married for 20 years, and when asked the secret to a happy relationship, he shrugs and says, "We just don't sweat the small stuff." Joe's worldview? He doesn't examine them. He doesn't care. He believes what he believes, and it gives him comfort. His happiness isn't complicated. It's rooted in simplicity. So, who's better off? The man who sees through everything, or the one who doesn't need to? It's tempting to say Joe, hands down. But then we have to ask, would you choose to be Joe? Would you trade your insight, your awareness, your depth of thought, for peace of mind? It's not an easy question, and maybe it doesn't have a clean answer. Because here's the thing, wisdom is a double-edged sword. It grants clarity, insight, and sometimes even beauty. But it also strips away the comforting illusions that make life feel soft and safe. So how do we live with wisdom? Can we bear its weight without letting it crush us? That's the challenge we'll tackle next. We've examined how wisdom destroys happiness. Now let's turn toward the tools, the strategies, that can help us hold both truth and joy at the same time. So you've seen too much. You've learned more than you can forget. You understand how fragile everything is: happiness, love, progress, even your own sense of self. Now what? Is there a way to carry all this knowledge without letting it drown you? Fortunately, thinkers across time, not just philosophers, but artists, mystics, psychologists, have proposed paths forward, ways to hold on to wisdom without sacrificing joy, ways to stay awake without going numb. Let's start with one surprisingly effective and very human strategy: strategic ignorance. Yeah, you heard that right. Choosing not to know everything. My friend Laura is a climate scientist. She's brilliant, informed, passionate, and absolutely exhausted. A few years ago, she hit a wall. Constant exposure to climate data, extinction forecasts, and environmental politics was crushing her mental health. She stopped sleeping, stopped laughing, stopped living. Then she made a radical decision. She started restricting when and how she engaged with her research. Mondays and Wednesdays, she goes deep into the data. The rest of the week, she disconnects. Not because she doesn't care, but because she does, and she knows she won't be able to do her best work if she's constantly overwhelmed. This isn't denial. It's boundaries. Strategic ignorance isn't about sticking your head in the sand. It's about choosing when to open your eyes and when to give them rest. We do this intuitively all the time. We scroll past the news story we can't handle today. We don't click on that video showing some new tragedy. We take breaks, because without those breaks, wisdom becomes suffering. Next, there's what some traditions call transcendent wisdom, the kind of knowing that goes beyond thought, beyond analysis, beyond words. You see this in Zen Buddhism, in mystical Christianity, in Sufi poetry. These traditions teach that the deepest truths can't be fully understood by the intellect, only experienced, lived. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks don't change. Life doesn't become easier. But your relationship to it does. You stop living in your head and start living in the moment. Fully. Directly. Without needing to explain everything. Modern mindfulness teachings echo this. Instead of trying to solve the human condition with logic, they invite you to come back to the breath, to the body, to the now. And guess what? The science backs this up. Mindfulness practices reduce anxiety, depression, and even physical pain. They help people hold difficult truths without being consumed by them. So maybe the problem isn't wisdom, but stopping at intellectual wisdom, the kind that just lives in your head. Maybe we need to let that wisdom settle into our bodies, into our hearts, into how we move through the world. Then there's what I like to call the creative response, inspired by Nietzsche's idea of dancing over the abyss. This is the path of the artist, the poet, the comic, the activist, the person who sees the darkness and decides to sing anyway, to build, to love, to create meaning where none existed before. This approach doesn't deny suffering. It starts with suffering and turns it into something beautiful, or funny, or useful, or tender. Think about the music that's helped you through heartbreak, the film that made you feel seen during your worst days, the friend who turned pain into laughter. These are creative responses to the abyss, not solutions, not escapes, but ways through. It's like Camus said, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Another powerful approach is something psychologists now call wisdom, integration. It's not about avoiding hard truths, it's about building the psychological muscles to hold them. Tools like cognitive reframing, learning to look at a thought from different angles. Radical acceptance, fully acknowledging what's real without trying to fight it or sugarcoat it. And emotional regulation, skills that let you feel deeply without getting stuck. This is the work therapists do. It's not about fixing reality. It's about helping people live with reality better, with more grace, more strength, more peace. Finally, there's communal wisdom, maybe the oldest path of all. Because here's a truth we don't talk about enough. Humans weren't built to carry the weight of the world alone. In many indigenous cultures, wisdom isn't something you hoard, it's something you share. The community has rituals, storytelling, dancing, prayer, art, that help distribute the emotional load. There's a reason why people cry more easily in groups. Why singing together feels transcendent. Why sitting in silence with others can be healing in ways no philosophy book ever could. We need each other. And in this world, hyperconnected but emotionally fragmented, that might be the hardest wisdom of all, that you can't bear this burden by yourself, nor should you have to. So, which of these paths resonates with you? Do you need more boundaries like Laura? More mindfulness? More creativity? More therapy? More community? There's no one right answer, but there are ways forward, and the fact that you're here, wrestling with these questions, already puts you in rare company. Because while the naive may be happier, the wise have the chance to build something deeper, a life of clarity, compassion, and courageous joy. A joy that knows about suffering and still chooses to bloom. So here we are, at the end of our journey through the paradox of wisdom. We've looked unflinchingly at the costs of knowing too much, how awareness of mortality can haunt even our happiest moments, how the illusion of free will collapses under scrutiny, how belief in progress gets shattered by a deeper look at history and human nature, how suffering pervades even our most joyful experiences, and how social relationships often rest on fragile illusions. We've seen how wisdom, while noble and revered, can also be a heavy burden, not just intellectually, but emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. But despite all of this, few of us would choose to go back. Even Schopenhauer, perhaps history's most pessimistic philosopher, didn't suggest we should embrace ignorance. He wasn't advocating for stupidity or denial. Instead, he pointed toward a different kind of life, one of dignity, compassion, and clarity, even in the face of suffering. Because while wisdom may rob us of certain comforts, it also grants us something profound, the chance to live authentically. To see life not as a fairy tale, but as a complex, fleeting, and deeply mysterious experience, and to still say yes to it. So where does that leave us? Let's step back for a moment and define what we've been circling this whole time, what we might now call the wisdom paradox. Here it is. Wisdom appears necessary for living a meaningful, ethical, and resilient life. Without it, we're vulnerable, easily manipulated, prone to repeating mistakes, blind to systems of injustice or harm. Wisdom gives us the tools to make better decisions, to understand ourselves, to care more deeply about others. But at the same time, wisdom strips away the illusions that make life feel safe, hopeful, and simple. It can leave us jaded, skeptical, even hopeless, aware of problems we can't fix, truths we can't forget, and patterns we can't unsee. This isn't just a philosophical thought experiment. It's a real, daily tension many of us feel. You learn about the flaws in your belief system, and suddenly your moral compass feels shaky. You become aware of the cost behind your comforts, and you can't enjoy them the same way. You realize how little control you actually have, and motivation becomes harder to hold on to. So then comes the meta question. How much wisdom should we pursue? Is there such a thing as too much? Is there an optimal point on the wisdom curve, beyond which returns start to diminish, and suffering increases faster than insight can justify? Should we, in a strange way, seek moderation in our pursuit of truth? Maybe. But maybe the more powerful question is this: how do we carry the weight of wisdom well? Because once we've seen, we can't unsee. But we can learn to walk with eyes open, and heart open too. We can learn to create meaning despite meaninglessness, or maybe even because of it. We can find satisfaction in effort, connection, kindness, not because they're guaranteed to last, but because they matter in the moment they're lived. Let me leave you with one final metaphor, one that might stay with you long after this video ends. Imagine two people standing at the edge of the ocean. One believes the water is safe and warm and endlessly inviting. They jump in with joy, unaware of the currents or the creatures below. The other knows the tides, the dangers, the cold. They understand what lies beneath. And yet, they step in anyway. They don't swim because it's safe. They swim because it's life. That's the difference between naive happiness and wise courage. So what will you choose? The blue pill of blissful ignorance, where you float along, untroubled, untouched, or the red pill of painful wisdom, where you see, know, and still choose to live fully? The truth is, if you've made it this far in this video, you've probably already chosen, because the act of asking these questions, of wanting to understand, of wrestling with meaning, reveals a commitment to living with eyes open. And once your eyes are open, there's no going back. But there is a path forward, a path of integration, of courage, of making meaning in the face of absurdity. And maybe, just maybe, that's where a deeper kind of happiness lives. Not in pleasure, not in illusion, but in the very act of bearing the burden of knowing too much and choosing to dance anyway. If this exploration of life's hardest truths resonated with you, changed your perspective, or gave you language for something you've long felt but couldn't express, share it with someone else who might be carrying wisdom's weight. Like and subscribe for more deep dives into the paradoxes that shape our lives. And in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. What has wisdom cost you? And what, if anything, has it given you in return? Because maybe, just maybe, sharing what we carry makes the weight a little easier for all of us. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the wisest among us aren't those who avoid suffering through ignorance, but those who transform suffering through understanding. And that transformation, that might just be wisdom's final gift.